Will not object. I just want to make it clear that at noon, the two leaders are coming to do a back and forth. So up until the time they arrive, I just wanted to let my friend know. And then after the leaders, Senator Vitter should be recognized to speak about the issue Senator Landrieu just raised, to be followed by me, if that's okay, if I could do that in a UC. So it would be Senator Cardin, the two leaders, Senator Vitter, myself.
Without objection.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, we prepared to celebrate Mother's Day this Sunday. I am today introducing a joint resolution which would remove the deadline for the state's ratification of the Equal Rights Amendment, the ERA. I want to thank my co-sponsors. As of this morning, my co-sponsor included Senator Kirk, Senator Mikulski, Senator Murkowski, Harkin, Sanders, Levin, Menendez, Stabenow, Heinrich, Boxer, Gillibrand, Durbin, Muttenberg, Murphy, Baldwin, Landrieu, Brown, and Begich. When Congress passed the ERA in 1972, it provided that the measure had to be ratified by 3/4 of the states, 38 states, within 7 years. This deadline was later extended to 10 years by a joint resolution enacted by Congress, but ultimately only 35 of the 38 states required ratified the ERA when the deadline expired in 1982. Congress has the authority to give the states another chance and should do so. In 1992, I just want to point out to my colleagues that the 27th Amendment to the Constitution prohibiting immediate congressional pay raise was ratified after 203 years. So this additional delay is certainly in keeping with our prior precedent. Article 5 of the Constitution contains no time limit for the ratification of constitutional changes. And the ERA time limit was contained in a joint resolution, not the actual text of the amendment. The 14th Amendment of the Constitution requires equal protection of the laws, and the Supreme Court has so far held that most sex and gender classifications are subject only to intermediate scrutiny when analyzing the laws that may have a discriminatory impact. In other words, right now, gender discrimination does not have the strict interpretation standard. It's not subject to the higher standard, which it should be. In 2011, Supreme Court Justice Scalia gave an interview in which he stated, and I'm going to quote his interview, and this is an exact quote, "Certainly the Constitution does not require discrimination on the basis of sex. The only issue is whether it prohibits it. It doesn't," end quote. In other words, we don't have that protection in the Constitution today. Ratification of the ERA by state legislatures would provide the courts with the clear guidance on holding gender or sex clarification to the strict standard. The ERA is a simple and straightforward constitutional amendment. It reads, "Equality of rights under the law shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of sex," end quote. The amendment gives power to Congress to enforce its provisions by appropriate legislation, and the amendment would take effect 2 years after ratification. Today, nearly half the states have a version of ERA written into their state constitution. My own state of Maryland's constitution reads that equality of rights under the law shall not be abridged or denied because of sex. I'm therefore pleased to introduce this joint resolution today, and I thank Representative Andrews for introducing a companion version in the House today as well. This legislation is endorsed by a wide variety of groups, including United for Equality, National Council of Women's Organization, American Association of University Women, Business and Professional Women's Foundation, Federally Employed Women, the U.S. Women's Chamber of Congress. I urge my colleagues to support this legislation. And with that, Madam President, let me ask consent that I be allowed to continue to speak, but that my remainder of my comments appear in a separate place in the record.
Without objection.
Madam President, I rise today with sadness in my heart to pay tribute to a very special individual, Gene M. Kirshner, a Baltimore County volunteer firefighter who died in the line of duty. Gene was just 25 and a volunteer firefighter for the Reisterstown Volunteer Fire Department. He rushed to the second floor of a house fire on April 24th in a vain attempt to save the resident. Gene was found unconscious and was rushed to Maryland's Shock Trauma Center, but succumbed to his injuries on May 2nd. Gene joined the company's rank when he was just 14 years of age and served as a junior firefighter for 2 years before becoming a volunteer firefighter. He came from a family of firefighters. His twin brother, Will, is also a firefighter. So is his sister, Shelley Brzezinski. Craig Hewitt, Assistant Chief of the Fire Department, said that Gene was selfless, well-liked, funny, got along with everybody. He liked helping people. Gene was laid to rest this past Sunday, and the entire Baltimore community is mourning the death of this kind, gentle young man who laid down his life in an attempt to save another's life. His brother and sister firefighters came from as far away as New York and North Carolina to pay special tribute to this young man who understood the risks he faced, but dedicated himself to helping ensure the safety of others. Gene was posthumously awarded the Fire Department's Medal of Honor because he embodied what we in our nation come to look at from our first responders: courage, selflessness, and dedication to duty. I know my U.S. Senate colleagues will want to join me in thanking Gene's family for giving our community such a special young man, and send our condolences to his family, friends, and fellow firefighters on this tragic loss of a hero. With that, Madam President, I would yield the floor and just yield the floor.
The Majority Leader.
Quorum being called.
No.
Madam President, it's been 47 days now since the United States Senate passed its sensible pro-growth budget. And as my friend, the Minority Leader, has said many times, that after the Senate passed a budget, the next logical step would be to go to conference and try to find common ground. This is what Senator McConnell said earlier this year. Quote, "We ought not to ignore the law any longer, and I think it's a good step in the direction of getting back to regular order, which is what we ought to follow." After years of calling for regular order, Republicans ought to be eager to go to conference. But Senator McConnell and the Republican caucus polled a 180, a flip-flop. They were for regular order before they were against regular order. For weeks, Republicans have refused to go to conference, and they've refused to explain why. The only excuse Republicans offered came not from the Minority Leader, but from the junior senator from Texas. Senator Cruz objected to the budget conference on the grounds that Democrats must concede basically everything before Republicans will negotiate anything. As one news report put it, the Republicans' offer is, quote, "first surrender and then we'll fight," end of quote. But Republicans know as well as Democrats that's not any way to negotiate. Unilateral disarmament in the legislative process is not the same thing as compromise. So Democrats, along with the media and the American people, are left to wonder and guess the real reason the Republicans are so determined to avoid a budget conference. And Republicans I guess, are they afraid to defend or debate their extreme budget in full public view? Probably. It can't be easy to defend a budget that would end Medicare as we know it. It can't be easy to stand strong for a plan that asks the middle class to foot the bill for more tax breaks for the rich, a politically unsustainable position already rejected by the voters. And it can't be easy to stick up for the arbitrary meat axe cuts with the sequester, which guts the safety net protecting the elderly, the poor, the middle class, veterans, and sometimes the helpless. Or is it possible that Republicans are simply hoping to delay compromise long enough to create another manufactured crisis as a nation once again approaches a default on its bills? Americans are tired of the type of knockdown, drag-out, debt-ceiling battles that caused a credit downgrade and cost our economy billions of dollars last year. Middle-class families have been through enough economic turmoil. It is unbelievable that Republicans would once again hold the full faith and credit of our government hostage. So I hope my Republican colleagues will come to their senses. The way to put our nation on sound fiscal footing is to set aside this obstruction and set sensible policy through regular order in the legislative process, not to extort concessions through dangerous hostage-taking. Passing a budget in each chamber was a good first step toward restoring regular order. The next move is to go to conference, set our minds on reaching a reasonable compromise that reverses the painful cuts of sequestration. Right now, Republicans are the only thing standing between Congress and compromise, but I'm optimistic that they'll not continue to put Americans' families through more financial pain for their short-term political gain. I hope I'm right. I would yield for a unanimous consent request to my friend from Washington.
Madam President.
Senator from Washington.
Madam President, I ask unanimous consent the Senate proceed to the consideration of calendar number 33, H-Con Res 25, that the amendment which is at the desk, the text of S-Con Res 8, the budget resolution passed by the Senate, be inserted in lieu thereof, that H-Con Res 25 as amended be agreed to, the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table, the Senate insist on its amendment, request a conference with the House on the disagreeing votes of the two houses, and the chair be authorized to appoint conferees on the part of the Senate, all with no intervening action or debate.
Is there objection?
Reserving the right to object, I would ask consent that the Senator modify her request so that it not be in order for the Senate to consider a conference report that includes tax increases or reconciliation instructions to increase taxes or raise the debt limit.
Madam President.
Is there objection to the modified request?
Madam President, reserving the right to object, what the Senator is asking is that we go back to what we had votes on throughout the entire budget debate, way into the morning hours, on the issues of reconciliation, on the issues of revenue, that were all debated and voted. Some passed, some were defeated. We are not going to take those up again. We are going to go to conference with the budget that was passed by the majority in the Senate and by the majority in the House, and those views will be represented in conference. But we can't get to that debate and that discussion without moving to conference, so I object to his unanimous request and ask for consent on my request again.
Objection is heard to the modified request. Is there objection to the original request?
Object.
Objection is heard.
Madam President.
Senator from Washington.
Well, Madam President, this is so challenging. It's now been 47 days since we passed our budget. Senate Democrats have now requested unanimous consent to move to conference, the next step, 5 times. We want to take the next step in this process. We want to move forward under regular order and continue this debate in an open and public way. But every time we try to take it to the next step, Senate Republicans stand up and they say no. Madam President, I think this comes as a surprise to the American people. I think they're disappointed. I know I am. I think a lot of people, myself included, expected that after calling for regular order so consistently for so long, Republicans would be eager now to take the next step in the process. Now, some Republicans say they want to negotiate a framework behind closed doors before they agree going to conference. But, Madam President, that's what a budget is. It is a framework that lays out our values and our priorities and helps us plan for our country's future. Why can't we discuss that framework in a formal public conference, which is what we call regular order. Madam President, I'm sure Republicans are not excited about the prospect of defending their extreme budget all over again in a public conference committee. We have seen time and again, and we all know Americans are not interested in more tax breaks for the wealthiest. They're not interested in Medicare vouchers. But Republicans wrote that budget. They voted for it. They passed it. They ought to be happy to defend it. I will say this, Madam President. I know Senate Democrats are happy to stand up and talk about ours. The American people now deserve to see those two visions. They need to see our visions side by side, contrasted with each other. And they need to see who's willing to compromise and who is not. Now, we have heard that the House Republican leadership doesn't want the Senate to appoint conferees because they don't want to go to conference, because they might have to take a lot of difficult votes in the House. Well, I'm sure my colleagues here remember the vote-a-rama that we had before we passed our budget. We considered over 100 amendments. We were here till 5 a.m. in the morning, the entire time voting on amendments, till every senator who wanted to be heard and offered an amendment did. And we had a very, very thorough and open debate, and we voted a lot. So I don't think the American people are going to be very sympathetic to the argument that the Republicans here don't want to go to conference because they're afraid that the House has to take a few votes. So, Madam President, it's deeply disappointing to me that Republicans are now running away from regular order. And in fact, they are, running right towards another crisis. And they are willing to take our American families and our economy along for the ride. Now, it should be noted that the House Republicans have announced a new conference. But it is not a conference on a budget deal. It's a conference of their Republican members to decide what they are going to demand in exchange for tanking our economy over the debt ceiling. It's absurd, and it's not going to happen. We know because we went through the same thing last time when we approached the debt limit. Just a few months ago, Republicans realized how dangerous it would be to play games with the debt limit, and how politically damaging it would be to play politics with potential economic calamity for our country. And they finally dropped their demands. The so-called Boehner rule died, and no amount of wishing by the Tea Party is going to bring that back. Madam President, the Republican strategy now of holding our economy hostage and trying to push us to another crisis is absolutely the wrong approach. And holding our budget conference hostage so they can get to that point is not going to be considered well by the American people. Getting a deal is not going to be easy. Any one of us knows that. It's going to take compromise. But this constant lurching from crisis to crisis that the House is demanding and is strategizing around is not what the American public want or deserve. So, Madam President, I'm here today to say Democrats are ready to take the next step. We need a negotiating party on the other side. They can bring all of their bill to conference and we can talk about it. We can find out a compromise. Compromise is not a dirty word. Oftentimes, we don't hear it a lot around here. But I believe many of our colleagues, on both sides of the aisle, frankly, want to return to regular order. They want to move away from these constant crises. I know that's what the American public wants. They want to see that we can govern. So I really urge those who are coming up here and time again blocking us from getting to a point to debate our two different budgets and to come to a compromise to allow us to get the work of the American people done and allow us to go to conference. Thank you, Madam President. I yield.
Madam President,
The Majority Leader.
before my friend leaves the floor, I want the record spread with this. The admiration that the Democratic caucus has for the senator from Washington is significant. She's an elected leader. She was the person chosen to be the chair of the super committee to come up with a plan to solve the nation's crisis we have economically, and she did yeoman's work. It was all done until a letter was received from virtually every Republican senator say, well, fine, great deal that Chairman Murray has done, but we're not going to agree to any revenue. And then to work through this contentious problems we've had here on the floor and come up with a budget is remarkable. And it's a budget that we're very proud of. And I would say to my friend, I think we are making some progress, because just within the past hour, the Speaker has said this, and this is a quote: we can't cut our way to prosperity. Now that is a significant step forward. The Speaker of the House of Representatives, for the first time in some time, has spoken reality, the truth, the facts. And I quote directly, we can't cut our way to prosperity. That's right. And that's why we have to get to regular order. We have to do what this body has been doing for 200 years or more, going to conference when there's a difference between what the House wants and what the Senate wants. That's all the chairman of the Budget Committee, Senator Murray, is asking, that we get together with our Republican colleagues and work out our differences. Now, I think our budget we were led by Chairman Murray is really a very, very good budget. Is it perfect? Of course not. And we would be willing to sit down and talk to our Republican colleagues in conference, the way we've done for centuries here, and try to work out our differences. For them just to stonewall us and say, as a junior senator from Texas said, fine, we'll go to conference, but you have to agree to what we want before we'll go. What in the world is that all about? So I admire, as does the entire Democratic caucus, and I'm confident, as the people of Washington are very, very proud of this stalwart senator who has done so much for this country. And I want to make sure that the Republicans understand she will be the chair of she is going to represent us. I'm not going to be negotiating this. Senator McConnell's not going to be negotiating this. It's going to be done by the senior senator from the state of Washington. And she's willing to deal with whoever the Republicans decide she should deal with.
Madam President,
Senator from California.
I wonder if the senator from Washington would enter into a bit of a colloquy with me at this time through the chair. I want to join with Senator Reid in thanking you, Senator Murray, for your amazing leadership. I was on the Budget Committee for several years, and I know that as a result of your becoming the chairman and, of course, being the most senior member next to Conrad for so long, you know this budget inside and out, and it's filled with complexities. The mandatories, the discretionaries, the defense, the non-defense, all the things that you know in your head. And you know how to get us to balance, not only in terms of the numbers, we will move toward balance in your budget, but also in terms of our priorities. So I just want to make sure that my people at home understand this. What you're telling us today is that for several years now, 2 or 3, the Republicans have been chastising the Democrats for not passing a budget in the Senate. Am I right on that? That is correct. Okay. And the reason we didn't do it is we had another law that actually set our caps. Am I right on that? So we didn't go through the budget. Okay.
The senator is correct.
All right. So you decided with Senator Reid and the leadership team to bring a budget to the floor, and as you relate, and I could never forget it, we stayed here till 5 in the morning handling over 100 amendments. Is that right?
The senator is correct.
And we passed the budget, and the House passed its version of a budget. The regular order, as I understand it, having asked the historian to go back and look, is that we then take the House budget and the Senate budget, we go to conference, and the conferees resolve the differences. And all my friend is asking here today, and she's asked it, or someone else has asked it in her stead, 5 times we're asking our Republican colleagues to allow our leader to name the conferees. Of course, Senator McConnell will name his, and walk into that conference committee to finish the budget. The budget is unfinished. Am I right? We have 2 versions. We need 1 version. And what you're telling us today, in no uncertain terms, is that the Republicans are stopping this country from having a budget. Am I stating it correctly?
The senator is stating it exactly correct.
Well, let me just say to my friend, I hope you plan to be here as often as you can, and those of us who can help you will be here to continue to ask for conferees so we can get to the next stage. When Senator McConnell said he would amend your request, wasn't he prejudging what would happen in the conference? He said no reconciliation, and he said something else. I don't remember his other condition. But
and no revenue.
And no revenue. So that's like you saying I will go to the conference, except I don't want to see any more cuts in after-school programs or senior citizen programs or veterans programs. In other words, we don't take our priorities as individual senators into the conference. It is a team approach where we will have to compromise. So isn't Senator McConnell, by laying out his conditions, completely sidestepping regular order?
Well, the senator would be correct, and I would add one other thought. What he is asking us to do is now go back and vote on votes that we already took when we went through the budget process, did not pass, and he's saying, well, my amendments didn't pass, but I'm not going to let you go to conference unless, you know, I get my way. Well, we have a majority, we have a minority, we go through hundreds of amendments. Some of them passed, some of them did not. It is the process that we go through, and then we take what we passed here. The House, by the way, passed a very different budget. We have a lot in difference. We go to a conference and we resolve those. That is what a conference is. But if every senator came out here and said on every bill we ever did, we're not going to go to conference unless I get the amendment that I lost on the floor, we would never do anything in this country. That's not how a democracy works.
Well, I thank my friend, because I got into this a little bit with Senator Cruz the other day. He doesn't want to go to conference because he's afraid we could pass the Buffett rule. We could come out of there with the Buffett rule that says that a billionaire executive should have to pay the same effective tax rate as his secretary. God forbid. He's afraid of that. So I just say they're afraid of the process. What are they afraid of? They control the House. We control the Senate. Obviously, to be a conference, you're going to have to meet somewhere in the middle. So it seems to me they have a fear of democracy, and it seems to me, and I don't like to use this word, but I will, it rhymes with democracy, it's called hypocrisy. They said that we wouldn't do a budget, and now they're stopping the budget, and I wanted to thank my friend and just make sure that America understands this. They ran around the country running against our candidates, saying our candidates wouldn't do a budget, and now they won't allow us to do a budget. And it just seems, to me, ridiculous, and I'm so happy that our leader and you, Senator Murray, are here to bring this issue the attention it deserves.
Madam President,
Majority
I ask
Leader.
unanimous consent that at 1:30 today, the Senate proceed to executive session to consider counters number 39 and 41 under the previous order.
Without objection.
With the consent, there will be up to 2 roll call votes at about 2 p.m. today. There may only be 1, but up to 2. On the nomination of Shelley Dick to be District Judge for the Middle District of Louisiana and Nelson Roman to be a District Judge for the Southern District of New York.
Without objection.
I would note the absence of quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.
Thank you, Madam President. I'd ask that the quorum call be vitiated.
Without objection.
Madam President, I rise today to speak about the bill we're considering, but also to speak in particular about one aspect of the bill. We know that the legislation as the so-called WRDA bill, the Water Resources Development Act, and I want to express strong support for the legislation. This bill is in fact bipartisan, which is something we need more of around here. It provides for, among other things, flood protection, safe drinking water, wastewater infrastructure, and protects the flow of commerce along our nation's rivers and waterways. I'm grateful for Chairman Boxer's efforts, Ranking Member Vitter, and all the members and staff of the Environment and Public Works Committee for their dedication to writing a bill that addresses the challenges facing our country's water systems. I wanted to speak in particular about inland waterways. Our nation has for many, many years now, many generations, a system of locks and dams that play a vital role in creating and sustaining jobs and supporting economic growth throughout the country. I know in my home state of Pennsylvania, even though I had been a state official for a number of years, I didn't have a full appreciation for what this meant until about July of, I guess it was the first week of July of 2007, when I was able to tour and actually see these major barges up close out in southwestern Pennsylvania. And to be able to see how the movement of coal or other commodities or energy sources across our waterways, what that meant to the economy of southwestern Pennsylvania, but indeed the economy of our Commonwealth and our country. So when we hear the phrase locks and dams in Pennsylvania, and especially in southwestern Pennsylvania, we don't think of some far-off concept. We think of commerce and the movement of commerce and the jobs and the economic growth that comes from that. Unfortunately, this system, this inland waterway system, is facing major challenges that threaten in ways that some of us couldn't imagine even a few years ago. The inland waterway system offers the most cost-competitive way to transport new commodities. It moves some 20% of the coal that is used to power our nation's electricity, much of it from Pennsylvania, also 22% of our petroleum products, and more than 60% of export grain that's moved because of this system. The shippers who produce or manufacture these commodities are in danger of losing their competitive edge unless we focus on proper funding for the lock and dam infrastructure. Unfortunately, the locks and dams of our nation have far outlived their design life. There hasn't been sufficient investment to make headway in replacing these locks and dams, but I'm hopeful that provisions that I and others have worked on in the Water Resources Development Act that we're considering now will address the challenges facing this system. Provisions from my bill, which by the way goes by the acronym RIVER, the River Act, that are included in the bill we're considering, will institute a number of project management reforms that will make future lock and dam projects make sure that they're built in the most cost-effective way possible. We can't ask for greater commitment to the system or greater investment without making sure that we're also providing reforms. These reforms include risk-based cost estimates and an external peer review process for Army Corps projects across the nation. This will help ensure that locks and dams and the projects that are undertaken are constructed in the way that is most efficient, and we also want to make sure that we have cost estimates that are realistic and, of course, avoid cost overruns. One of the provisions of the bill will also adjust the current cost-sharing system by increasing the threshold for the industry to contribute to major rehabilitation projects to $20 million. This will allow for more funding for lock and dam projects, which is badly needed right now. These provisions in the overall Water Resources Bill are common sense. They also happen to be fiscally responsible proposals that will significantly improve our nation's inland waterways system and to help ensure our nation's waterways can continue to be an effective method to ship commodities. Well, how do we pay for that? Well, rather interesting development for Washington, about which I'm about to describe for you. I'm grateful that so many of the provisions in my bill have been included, but we also need to have an important conversation about how to finance this system and to keep the inland waterways, or I should say the Inland Trust Fund, sustainable in the long term. I filed an amendment, Amendment number 854, that will raise the barge user fee from 20 cents per gallon to 29 cents per gallon. This fee has not been raised since 1986, and as a result is not keeping up with inflation and project costs. We have great bipartisan support for this. Senator Alexander is leading this effort with me, and the amendment is co-sponsored by the following senators: Senator Blunt, Senator McCaskill, Senator Durbin, Senator Stabenow, Senator Klobuchar, Senator Landrieu, Senator Franken, and Senator Harkin, indicating the wide reach of the inland waterway system and its impact on so many industries in so many states across the country. The current rate, the barge fee of 20 cents per gallon, right now is not raising sufficient funding to keep up with operations and maintenance needs along the reach of the system. If we don't make this investment now, it could have dire consequences to multi-billion-dollar industries that rely on the use of locks and dams to move their goods. Just consider coal being one of those examples. All 300 users of the inland waterway system support this increase. Let me say that again, because it just doesn't happen very much in Washington. All 300 users of the inland waterway system support this increase from 20 cents per gallon of a barge fee to 29 cents. And here we have an example of an industry that is forward-looking and asking Congress to allow them to pay more in order to make critical investments in their own infrastructure. In addition to the support of industry, the user fee increase is backed by a diverse array of organizations across the country, including the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, the National Farmers Union, the National Association of Manufacturers, the American Farm Bureau, the AFL-CIO, and over 250 national and local organizations, including barge operators, agriculture, energy, and civic and conservation groups. In southwestern Pennsylvania alone, over 200,000 jobs rely on the proper functioning of locks and dams on the lower Monongahela River, which is, for those who don't know, is a river on the east or the western end of our state that flows into the city of Pittsburgh, one of the three rivers that we describe as part of our landscape in Pittsburgh. If one of these locks were to fail, it would endanger all 200,000 jobs and have a negative impact of over $1 billion just in that region, not to mention the adverse impact beyond the region. Raising the user fee now will help prevent a catastrophe in the near future. I understand that there are objections to addressing important concerns about including a funding fix for locks and dams in this bill due to the so-called blue slip concerns that involve the House of Representatives. I will work to look for other vehicles so we don't continue to kick this can down the road, and I'll talk to members of the House to include this fix in their version. If we can't raise revenue on an industry that's asking to pay more so they can invest in their infrastructure, I'm afraid that the future of our waterway system is in great jeopardy. Many colleagues of mine in the Senate on both sides of the aisle recognize the importance of providing a way to pay for investments that we need in our locks and dams system, and I urge the House to follow suit, and I have no doubt that they want to do the same thing. We can't squander the critical foundations that have made America what it is, and reinvesting in our nation's waterways will allow us to seize economic opportunities, remain competitive in the world, and protect and create jobs for generations to come. And I'll just note one citation of history, Madam President. It's a major volume here of Pennsylvania history, but this goes back to the 1800s when we developed a canal system to move commodities and commerce across our waterways. I'll just read one sentence from page 180 of a book entitled Pennsylvania, A History of the Commonwealth. Here's what they said all those years ago in the 1800s, talking about coal. Though, and I'm quoting, through these routes, anthracite coal left Pennsylvania for England, Russia, Central Europe, and Asia. But the reason why that coal was able to get to those places is because we had a system in place to move it. And what we don't want to have today in our time is a system that breaks down because we weren't willing to make the investment. And as I said before, this investment is supported by all those organizations, but especially the 300 users who are willing to invest more so that tomorrow will be bright and we can move commerce across the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania and across our country. And with that, Madam President, I would yield the floor.
Senator from Arizona.
Madam President, before the senator from Pennsylvania leaves the floor, I'd like to thank him for his forthright and courageous statement on the situation in Syria. I thank him for his involvement and his commitment to the freedom of the people of Syria. Madam President, today I'm introducing the Television Consumer Freedom Act of 2013. The legislation has three principal objectives. One, encourage the wholesale and retail unbundling of programming by distributors and programmers. In other words, allow the consumer, the television viewer who subscribes to cable, to have a la carte capability. In other words, not required to buy a whole bunch of channels that consumer may or may not wish to subscribe to. In other words, a la carte. If you want to watch one television program, you can watch it. If you don't have to. The situation today, obviously, is far different from that. It would also establish consequences if broadcasters choose to downgrade their over-the-air service, and three, eliminate the sports blackout rule for events that are held in publicly financed stadiums. For over 15 years, I've supported giving consumers the ability to buy cable channels individually, which is known as a la carte, to provide consumers more control over viewing options in their home and, as a result, their monthly cable bill. The video industry, principally cable companies and satellite companies and the programmers that sell channels like NBC and Disney ABC, continue to give consumers two options when buying TV programming. First, to purchase a package of channels, whether you watch them all or not, or second, not purchase any cable programming at all. Two choices. You can either buy one of their packages or not watch it at all. That's unfair and wrong, especially when you consider how the regulatory deck is stacked in favor of industry against the American consumer. It's clear when one looks at how cable prices have gone up over the last 15 years, which is brought to light by the most recent Federal Communications Commission pricing survey. In the FCC survey, the average monthly price of expanded basic service for all communities surveyed increased 5.4% over 12 months ending January 1st, 2011, or to $54.46 compared to an increase of 1.6% in the Consumer Price Index. In other words, the cost of cable went up nearly 4 times the consumer prices that people pay for everything else. You can only do that when you have a monopoly. Over the last 15 years, this rise in cost has become even more evident. According to the FCC, the price of expanded basic cable has gone up at a compound average annual growth rate of 6.1% during the period of 1995 to 2011. This means the average annual cable price has gone up about $25 a month in 1995 to over $54 today. That is a 100% price increase. People are on fixed incomes. People are hurting. Why in the world should they have a 100% cost increase, and the only way it can be done is through monopolies? Those who provide video directly to consumers, like cable and satellite companies, are not solely to blame for the high prices consumers face today. Many articles have been written about the packages of channels commonly called bundles that are sold to cable and satellite companies by video programmers like Comcast, NBC, Time Warner, Viacom, and the Walt Disney Company, which owns 80% of ESPN. The worldwide leader in sports, as ESPN calls itself, thrives because of the advertising revenue it's able to generate and large subscriber fees. According to a January 2012 Newsweek article, ESPN charges $4.69 per household per month, citing a research company. By comparison, the next costliest national network, TNT, costs $1.16. Again, $4.69 for ESPN. The next expensive one is $1.16 for TNT. Whether you watch ESPN or not, and I do all the time, all cable subscribers are forced to absorb this cost. Not every American watches ESPN. Not every American should be forced to watch ESPN and pay $4.69 per household per month in order to have it carried into their homes when they don't view it. Because these channels are bundled into packages, all cable consumers, whether they watch sports or not, are paying for them anyway. Cable and satellite carriers that consider dropping ESPN must also contemplating losing other channels in the bundle, like the Disney Channel. Some have described this as, quote, a tax on every American household. Others, like the CEO of the American Cable Association, have said, quote, my next-door neighbor is 74, a widow. She says to me, quote, why do I have to get all that sports programming? She has no idea that in the course of a year, for just ESPN and ESPN2, she is sending a check to Disney for about $70. She would be apoplectic if she knew. Ultimately, there's going to be a revolt over the cost, or policymakers will get involved because the cost of these things are so out of line with cost of living that someone's going to put up a stop sign. Today, we're putting up a stop sign, and we're going to find out. We're going to find out how powerful these companies are, as opposed to clearly correcting an injustice that's being inflicted on the American people. This legislation would eliminate regulatory barriers to a la carte by freeing up multi-channel video programming distributors, that's the cable and satellite companies, like cable, satellite, and others offering video services, to offer any video programming service on an a la carte basis. But if they want to keep bundling, they can do that too. They can make both offers to the American subscriber. In order to give these companies an incentive to offer programming on an a la carte basis, the legislation links the availability of the compulsory copyright license to the voluntary offering of a la carte service by the MVPD. In other words, if these companies don't offer a broadcast station and any other channels owned by the broadcaster on an a la carte basis, then that company cannot rely on the compulsory license to carry those broadcast stations. The compulsory license is a benefit conferred on these corporations. So it's reasonable to ask the recipients of that benefit to provide consumers with an a la carte option, and I emphasize an option. To address the notion that a la carte options are being denied distributors, the legislation conditions important regulatory benefits like network non-duplication, syndicated exclusivity, blackout rights, and retransmission consent option on the programs, allowing MVPDs to sell their channels on an a la carte basis. It's time that consumers got something in return other than a higher bill at the end of the month. Furthermore, because not all programmers also own broadcast stations, the bill contains a provision that would create a wholesale a la carte market by allowing programmers to bundle their services in a package, only if they also offer these services for the MVPDs to purchase on an individual channel basis. If a cable operator doesn't want to carry channels like MTV, it would have the option of not doing so and only buying and carrying the channels it thinks its consumers want to watch. Finally, the bill provides if the parties cannot agree to the terms of a carriage agreement, the final offer made by each side must be disclosed to the FCC. The second section of the bill responds to statements by broadcast executives that they may, quote, downgrade the content of their over-the-air signals or pull them all together so that the program received by MVPD customers is preferable to that available over the air. Our country is facing a spectrum crunch, and if broadcasters who are using the public airways in return for meeting certain public interest obligations are going to deviate from those obligations, it is my view we should consider if that is the most efficient use of our country's spectrum. It would be a distortion of this basic social compact if over-the-air viewers were treated as second-class citizens. This bill provides a legislative response if broadcasters either downgrade their signal or pull it all together. The bill provides that a broadcaster will lose its spectrum allocation, and that spectrum will be auctioned by the FCC if the broadcaster does not provide the same content over the air as it provides through MVPDs. Finally, my bill touches on sports blackout rules that can limit the ability of subscribers to see sporting events when they take place in their local community but are not broadcast on a local station. When the venues in which these sporting events take place has been the beneficiary of taxpayer funding, it's unconscionable to deny those taxpayers who paid for it the ability to watch the games on television when they would otherwise be available. Therefore, the bill proposes to repeal the sports blackout rules insofar as they apply to events taking place in publicly financed venues and/or involve a publicly financed local sports team. In the end, this Television Consumer Freedom Act is about giving the consumer more choices when watching television. It's time for us to help shift the landscape to benefit television consumers. Now, I know the broadcasters and cable companies are likely to suggest that the government should not micromanage how they offer their product to customers and that bundling can promote diverse offerings. What those interests fail to mention is that the government has already entered the marketplace and conferred certain rights and privileges like a compulsory license, network non-duplication, syndicated exclusivity, and retransmission consent, which stack the deck in favor of everyone but the American consumer. I hope the introduction of this act furthers the debate on issues like a la carte channel selection, and I look forward to the channel's consideration of the bill. I note my friend from New York on the floor, who I'm sure will illuminate us much more than I just did. Madam President, I yield the floor.
Well, thank you, Madam President. For me to be more illuminating than my friend from Arizona would be a rare, rare moment. But I'll give it a shot. Anyway, I thank him. He's always cared about the consumer, and once again, he's on the floor taking another one of his courageous stands to help the American people. So we salute him as always as he exits off into the sunlight, or whatever he's exiting off into. Anyway, thank you, Madam President. I rise today